Violet Carmichael, a quiet night cleaner with weary eyes and a spotless record, is paraded past jeering guests, accused of stealing a ruby necklace worth millions. With her dignity and future on the line, what will she risk to prove her innocence? Violet Carmichael arrived at the Harrington Hotel just as the last of the limousines were pulling up. The city's elite, dripping in jewels and arrogance, flowed into the grand ballroom. She, in her simple, faded uniform, was nearly invisible, a ghost in the periphery of their opulent world. 12 years she'd polished their silver, scrubbed their floors, and emptied their overflowing ashtrays. 12 years of being unseen. Inside, the marble corridors gleamed under the chandeliers. The air thrummed with anticipation, a symphony of clinking champagne flutes and forced laughter. Violet navigated the hallways with practiced ease, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking softly on the polished stone. She clocked in, collected her cleaning cart, and began her rounds, the scent of expensive perfume clinging to the air. Later, after the gala had reached its crescendo, she received her final assignment, Suite 712, the heiress's room. As she approached, she could still hear the muffled sounds of revelry, the echoes of laughter and music bleeding through the thick wooden door. She focused on her work, meticulously straightening the rumpled bedspread, wiping down the vanity, and emptying the overflowing wastebasket. The next morning, chaos descended. A frantic energy gripped the hotel. The heiress's ruby necklace, a breathtaking piece worth millions, had vanished. Security footage was reviewed. Mr. Langley, Violet's supervisor, summoned her. The video showed Violet entering Suite 712 after the event. No one else. Before a gathering of shocked guests and whispering staff, Mr. Langley accused her. His voice, usually oily and ingratiating, was now sharp and accusatory. He fired her on the spot. Violet stood there, her cheeks burning, her heart pounding, as she was marched out of the Harrington, past the judging eyes of people she had served faithfully for over a decade. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She was innocent. The door to her apartment slammed shut, the sound swallowed by the threadbare rug. Violet sank onto the worn sofa, the springs groaning in protest. The small space, usually a haven, now felt like a cage. The city's headlines screamed from the discarded newspaper on the coffee table, "Hotel thief nabbed," beneath a blurry photo of her being escorted out of the Harrington. She couldn't bring herself to read the article. The accusation alone was a brand, searing her skin. She couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. Just stared at the fading floral wallpaper, each bloom a mocking reminder of a life that felt equally withered. The phone rang, a shrill intrusion. It was HR from the hotel, a voice cold and detached informing her of the official termination of her employment, effective immediately. Talk of pending paperwork, return of uniform, and a final paycheck, an insultingly small sum after 12 years of dedicated service. Violet hung up without a word, the dial tone a relentless drone in the small apartment. Eviction. The word echoed in her mind. Without the job, she wouldn't be able to make rent. Where would she go? What would she do? Isolation threatened to engulf her. Her neighbors, always polite but distant, would now view her with suspicion, their smiles replaced with furtive glances. Her reputation, carefully built over years of honest toil, was shattered. A memory flickered. Violet, a bright-eyed 18-year-old, graduating top of her class, a scholarship to the state university within reach. Then her mother's diagnosis, a swift and brutal cancer that stole her vitality. The scholarship was forfeited, replaced by endless shifts at the local diner, caring for her mother until the very end. Her own dreams shelved, sacrificed for the woman who had given her everything. Another memory surfaced, sharp and painful. The early years of her marriage, filled with hope and promise. Then the accident, a drunk driver, a blind curve, and her husband gone in an instant. She was left a widow with a toddler to raise, navigating grief and fear with a fierce determination. Juggling multiple part-time jobs, cleaning offices, waitressing, anything to keep a roof over her daughter's head. The loneliness was a constant companion, a shadow that followed her through the years. There were moments of grace, small victories that kept her going. Her daughter, Lily, graduating high school, earning her own scholarship. Lily's phone calls, full of laughter and encouragement. And then, finally, the job at the Harrington. Steady work, decent pay, a sense of stability after years of struggle. A place where she could take pride in her work, ensuring every corner sparkled, every surface gleamed. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. It was hers. Now, it was all gone. Stripped away in an instant, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. The injustice of it all was a crushing weight. She had always played by the rules, worked hard, and treated everyone with respect. How could this happen? How could her good name, her very sense of self, be so easily destroyed by a single, cruel accusation? She looked around the apartment, at the few cherished possessions she had managed to accumulate over the years. A framed photograph of Lily, beaming with pride at her graduation. A small, hand-painted vase her mother had given her. A worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, a comfort read since childhood. These were the things that mattered, the things that defined her. Not a missing necklace, not the whispers and sneers of strangers. But even these small comforts offered no solace. The weight of the world pressed down on her, suffocating her. Despair threatened to consume her, a dark and relentless tide. She was Violet Carmichael, a woman who had weathered storms, faced hardship with grit, and always managed to find a glimmer of hope. But now, staring into the abyss, she wondered if she had anything left to fight for. The city lights outside her window blurred through a film of unshed tears. She curled up on the sofa, a small, broken figure, and prayed for a way out of the darkness. Days bled into nights. Exhaustion gnawed at Violet, yet sleep offered no respite, only replays of the gala, Mr. Langley's pronouncements, the whispers that followed her like a shroud. She'd lost track of time, existing in a haze of shame and disbelief. Then, a flicker. A memory, sharp and clear, the whisper of air, the almost imperceptible movement beneath the suite door. A shadow. She had to try. The Harrington loomed before her, a glittering fortress of wealth and indifference. Taking a deep breath, Violet walked toward the service entrance, steeling herself against the inevitable rejection. Mr. Langley was in his office, the door slightly ajar. She pushed it open. "Mr. Langley, please," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I need to explain. I remember something, a shadow, under the door. Before I went in. Someone else was there. He didn't even look up from his paperwork. Violet, I told you, the matter is closed. The footage doesn't lie. There was no one else. But I saw it. It was quick, just a glimpse, but I know what I saw." Her hands clenched at her sides. "Please, just look at the tapes again. Focus on the floor, near the door." Langley finally raised his head, his expression a mixture of annoyance and pity. "Violet, I understand this is difficult for you, but there's nothing more to discuss. Security has reviewed everything. You were the only one. I suggest you move on." His words were a physical blow. She'd hoped, foolishly, that he would listen, that he would see the desperation in her eyes. But he was unmoved, a gatekeeper guarding the gilded walls of the Harrington. Defeated but not broken, Violet retreated, a plan forming in her mind. She couldn't rely on Langley. She had to find proof herself. The next day, armed with a cheap wig, oversized sunglasses, and a borrowed cleaning uniform from a distant cousin, Violet approached the hotel. The disguise felt flimsy, pathetic, but it was all she had. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she slipped through the revolving doors, trying to appear confident, invisible. She made her way to the staff area, a labyrinth of corridors and utility rooms. The air was thick with the smell of bleach and stale coffee. She needed someone on the inside, someone who might be willing to listen. She remembered Maya Forbes, the young concierge with the bright smile and kind eyes. Maya had always been friendly, offering a cheerful greeting, a moment of genuine connection in the impersonal atmosphere of the hotel. It was a long shot, but Violet had nothing to lose. Finding Maya wasn't difficult. She was at her station near the main lobby, assisting a guest with directions. Violet waited until the guest was gone, then approached cautiously. "Maya?" she asked, her voice muffled by the wig. Maya turned, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Can I help you?" Violet lowered her glasses slightly. "It's me." Violet. Recognition dawned in Maya's eyes, followed by a flicker of surprise and concern. She glanced around nervously. "Violet? What are you doing here? You shouldn't be here." I know," Violet said quickly. "But I need your help." "I didn't steal that necklace, Maya. I swear I didn't." Maya hesitated, her gaze darting between Violet and the entrance. "Mr. Langley said," "I know what he said," Violet interrupted. "But there's something he missed. I saw a shadow under the door. Someone else was in that hallway. Please, just help me look at the security tapes again. There has to be something." Maya chewed on her lip, her expression conflicted. "I don't know, Violet. If I get caught, I understand," Violet said, her voice laced with disappointment. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. My life, my reputation, it's all gone." Maya looked at Violet, really looked at her, saw the desperation in her eyes, the weariness etched on her face. She remembered Violet's kindness, the way she always took the time to say hello, to ask about her day. She saw injustice, plain and simple. "Okay," Maya said, her voice barely a whisper. "Okay, I'll help you." Relief washed over Violet, so potent it almost brought her to her knees. "Thank you, Maya. Thank you." They slipped into the security office when the usual attendant, a bored man named Carl, went for his afternoon break. Maya navigated the system with practiced ease, pulling up the footage from the night of the gala. They fast-forwarded to the relevant time, focusing on the hallway outside the heiress's suite. Minutes ticked by, agonizingly slow. Nothing. Just the endless procession of guests, the occasional staff member. Violet was about to give up hope when Maya gasped. "There. Look," she exclaimed, pointing to the screen. A gloved hand, emerging from the shadows, briefly closed the door to the suite. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Someone had been inside the room moments before Violet arrived. "That's it!" Violet cried, her voice trembling with excitement. "That proves it. I wasn't the only one." But who was it? The footage was grainy, the angle obscured. They needed to find a way to identify the person. Maya zoomed in on the floor near the door. "Wait a minute," she said, her eyes narrowing. "Look at that. Red fibers. Like from the red carpet in the ballroom." Violet leaned closer. She could see it now, faint but distinct, tiny red fibers clinging to the base of the door. A trail. "The staff elevator," Violet said, her mind racing. The ballroom staff uses the staff elevator to get to the storage rooms on the lower levels. But how do we get to the staff elevator without being seen? Maya asked, her voice laced with concern. "I'll go," Violet said, her determination hardening. "You distract Mr. Langley. Tell him there's a problem with one of the guests' reservations. Something that will keep him busy." Maya nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and admiration. Okay. Be careful, Violet. Violet slipped out of the security office, her heart pounding, and made her way toward the staff elevator. She moved quickly, silently, her senses on high alert. As she rounded a corner, she froze. Standing directly in front of her was the hotel's head of security, a burly man with a stern expression. His eyes narrowed as he took in Violet's disguise. Well, he said, his voice low and menacing. What do we have here? Cornered by the head of security, a man who looked like he hadn't smiled since birth, Violet felt her resolve falter. She squeezed Maya's hand, the small gesture a surprising source of courage. Please, she said, her voice trembling only slightly. Just give me a chance to show you. I can prove I didn't do it. Maya stepped forward, her voice calm and steady. Mr. Davies, Violet is a kind woman. She wouldn't steal anything. We found something on the security footage. Something everyone missed. Davies's expression didn't change. He was a wall of suspicion, but Maya's confidence seemed to give him pause. He gestured toward a small office down the hall. All right. You have 5 minutes. Inside, Violet fumbled with the controls, her fingers clumsy with nerves. Maya guided her, pointing out the correct sequence of commands to access the overlooked footage. Finally, the screen flickered to life, showing the hallway outside the heiress's suite. Violet fast-forwarded to the crucial moments before she entered the room. There it was, the gloved hand, the subtle movement, the door closing almost imperceptibly. Davies watched, his frown deepening. He rewound the footage, studying it intently. A muscle twitched in his jaw. Enhance that section, he ordered, pointing to the gloved hand. The image sharpened, revealing a distinctive ring on the gloved finger, a signet ring bearing a crest. Violet didn't recognize it, but she knew someone would. The evidence was undeniable. She hadn't stolen the necklace. Davies let out a long breath. This changes things. He looked at Violet, his eyes no longer filled with accusation, but a hesitant kind of curiosity. Wait here. He left the office, disappearing down the hallway. Violet slumped against the wall, her legs suddenly weak. Maya put an arm around her. You did it, Violet. You actually did it. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Violet imagined the whispers, the judgment, the possibility that Davies wouldn't believe the footage. She replayed the day she was fired, the shame and the fear. She wondered if she could ever truly escape the shadow of that accusation. Finally, Davies returned, followed by a small group of people, Mr. Langley, the hotel manager, and several other members of the staff. Their faces were a mixture of confusion and apprehension. Davies gestured toward the screen. Everyone, please watch this. He replayed the footage, the gloved hand appearing again, the door closing. A collective gasp filled the room. Mr. Langley's face turned a shade of purple. He stammered, I don't understand. The cameras, the manager, a tall, impeccably dressed woman named Ms. Abernathy, stepped forward. Mr. Davies, who is that person? Davies zoomed in on the signet ring. We're running facial recognition now, but the ring is a good start. I have a feeling we know exactly who this is. A murmur rippled through the room. All eyes turned to Mr. Langley, whose face was now a mask of disbelief. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Suddenly, a voice cut through the tension. That's Lord Ashworth's ring. A junior staff member, a young man named Thomas, pointed at the screen, his voice barely above a whisper. He was at the gala. He's a regular here. Ms. Abernathy's eyes narrowed. Lord Ashworth. A high-profile guest. This is unacceptable. She turned to Davies. Bring him in. As Davies left to find Lord Ashworth, the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. The suspicion that had clung to Violet began to dissipate, replaced by a growing sense of unease and disbelief. People who had sneered at her the day before now avoided her gaze. Mr. Langley looked like he might faint. Lord Ashworth was apprehended trying to slip away through a side exit. He was brought back to the security office, his face pale and drawn. He denied everything, of course, blustering about his reputation and threatening legal action. But when Davies replayed the footage, pointing out the ring and the undeniable evidence, his protests faltered. The room was silent as the truth sank in. Violet stood at the center of it all, her heart pounding in her chest. The shock was slowly giving way to a profound sense of relief. She was innocent. They all knew it. The weight of the accusation, which had pressed down on her for days, began to lift. She could breathe again. Lord Ashworth, his aristocratic facade crumbling, was escorted away by security, his reputation in tatters. The whispers followed him, but this time, they weren't directed at Violet. Mr. Langley, finally understanding the depth of his mistake, looked at Violet, his face etched with shame. The crowd's attitude shifted from suspicion to sympathy for Violet. Violet stood straighter, the humiliation and despair that had consumed her replaced by a quiet dignity. It was over. She was free. Security was removing the real thief, and Violet stood at the center of the room, her shock giving way to relief as the truth spread. The actual thief, a man named Sterling Bryant, a renowned art dealer known for his extravagant parties and even more extravagant spending habits, was frog-marched through the lobby by 2 security guards. His face, once flushed with arrogance, was now a mask of mortified fury. He spat a curse as he was bundled into a waiting police vehicle, his reputation irrevocably shattered before the city's elite. Mr. Langley, meanwhile, stood to the side, his face a study in mortification. His usual bluster was gone, replaced by a pale, clammy sheen. He kept glancing at Violet, a flicker of something akin to shame in his eyes. The hotel's manager, a tall, impeccably dressed woman named Eleanor Vance, approached Violet, her expression contrite. "Miss Carmichael," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the hushed room, "on behalf of the Harrington Hotel, I offer you my sincerest apologies for the egregious error that occurred here tonight. Your integrity has been unjustly questioned, and for that, we are deeply sorry." Eleanor extended a hand, which Violet hesitantly shook. "We would be honored if you would consider returning to your position here at the hotel. In addition to reinstatement, we would like to offer you a significant raise and will be issuing a public commendation for your honesty and unwavering commitment to your duties." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled staff and guests. Some, who had earlier sneered at Violet, now offered tentative smiles. The shift in attitude was palpable. Eleanor then turned to Maya, her voice warm. "Miss Forbes, your quick thinking and dedication to justice were instrumental in uncovering the truth. The Harrington Hotel is fortunate to have you on our team, and your actions will not go unnoticed." As the crowd began to disperse, Mr. Langley shuffled towards Violet, his hands clasped nervously in front of him. "Miss Carmichael," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, I owe you an apology. I acted rashly, and I was wrong. Terribly wrong." Violet, her head held high, simply nodded curtly. "Thank you, Miss Forbes, and the head of security, for your assistance." She turned away from Mr. Langley, offering him no further acknowledgement. There was nothing more to be said. His words felt hollow, insignificant in the face of the humiliation she had endured. Violet walked out of the Harrington Hotel, the applause of the remaining staff and a few genuinely sympathetic guests echoing behind her. She was no longer invisible, no longer a shadow flitting through the corridors of the opulent hotel. Her dignity, her good name, had been restored. It was not just a victory for her, but a victory against the prejudice and assumptions that often clung to those who worked behind the scenes. As she stepped onto the sun-drenched sidewalk, the city seemed brighter, the air fresher. The weight that had been crushing her for days lifted, replaced by a sense of lightness, of liberation. She had faced the worst, and she had emerged stronger. The faces of those who had doubted her, who had judged her based on her uniform and her quiet demeanor, flashed through her mind. She didn't harbor anger or resentment. Instead, she felt a satisfaction knowing that she had proven them wrong, not with grand pronouncements or fiery speeches, but with simple, unwavering honesty. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she dialed her daughter's number. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Mom? What's up? Are you all right?" "I'm all right, sweetheart," Violet said, her voice thick with emotion. "I just wanted to let you know, everything's okay. They know I didn't do it. They know the truth." A long silence followed, then a choked sob. "Oh, Mom," her daughter said, her voice breaking. "I knew it. I knew you wouldn't do anything like that. I'm so proud of you." Violet smiled, tears streaming down her face. "I'll tell you all about it later. I'm coming home now." She ended the call and took a deep breath, the morning air filling her lungs. The future was uncertain, but in a long time, it felt filled with possibility. The job at the Harrington Hotel, the raise, the public commendation, those were all welcome, but they weren't what truly mattered. What mattered was that her daughter knew the truth, that her name was cleared, that she had stood up for herself and won. She was respected by those who once judged her, and the sunrise painted a soft glow on her face as she started walking toward home. Her future looked bright.